Welcome to Jumpseat Therapy, brought to you by Active Mind Counseling. Jumpseat Therapy is a mindfulness program designed for flight attendants and other airline professionals to help recognize and navigate burnout while rediscovering your passion for flying. Holding patterns. In this module, we'll explore common thinking patterns that can affect our mood and perception. We'll also learn how to recognize them and how to move on from them. It's time to fly. After a long duty day, you decide to join your crew in the hotel bar for debriefing and bonding over drinks. While you get to know each other, the conversation continually circles back to work. It makes sense, because that's what brought you all together. A colleague mentions the new uniforms in wear testing. Everyone at the table has something critical to say about the new uniforms, except you. After a couple glasses of wine, you say, "I actually like the uniforms." Everyone at the table laughs. Some playfully tease you about your opinion. Others try to convince you that you are wrong. Before long, the night ends. You have an early van time tomorrow. The next morning, you meet your crew on the shuttle to the airport. You say good morning. No one responds. You start to wonder if you're being excluded for expressing your opinion on the new uniforms. For the flight home, you keep to yourself and only speak to your colleagues about things pertinent to the flight. You believe they don't like you and add them to your no-fly list after landing. You may recall from a previous module, our minds will fill in the blanks if we don't have all the information. Sometimes our minds engage in cognitive distortions, which are like thinking holding patterns. Much like how an airplane can be delayed by a holding pattern, our happiness and life satisfaction can be delayed if we engage in these thinking traps too often. Let's review common cognitive distortions. There are many cognitive distortions. However, for the purposes of Jumpseat Therapy, we will focus on 7 major distortions: all or nothing thinking, catastrophizing, overgeneralization, mind reading, personalization, filtering, and emotional reasoning. All or nothing thinking is looking at events, people, concepts, and the world in general as either black or white. Reality is more complex and operates in shades of gray. For example, as a purser, you meticulously plan a service for passengers, aiming for a flawless experience. However, a minor hiccup occurs. Catering forgot to load cloth napkins. In the realm of all or nothing thinking, you might perceive the entire service as a complete failure because it didn't meet the unrealistic expectation of perfection. Engaging in all or nothing thinking can lead to feeling a deep sense of failure and disappointment, the inability to see the positive aspects of the service, and loss of satisfaction as you tie your success to the unattainable standard of perfection. To release yourself from this holding pattern, evaluate the situation more holistically. Instead of viewing it as either perfect or a failure, recognize the positive elements. Acknowledge that small imperfections are a normal part of any service industry, and focus on improvement rather than aiming for unattainable perfection. Catastrophizing is when we only see the worst possible outcome of a situation. For example, your in-flight manager sends you an email requesting a meeting before your next trip. Despite not knowing what the meeting is about, you believe you will be terminated. You begin to wonder how you will pay your rent or what you will do for work. You may even imagine the shame you'll feel when you move back in with your parents. Engaging in catastrophizing can lead to extreme anxiety or panic as our mind goes into survival mode. We may even waste time and energy making unnecessary preparations. Negativity bias and imagining the worst-case scenario are ways our mind tries to prepare us for survival. Thank your mind for protecting you, and then remember there is also a best-case scenario. Once you've established the best-case scenario, imagine the countless possibilities in between that are all just as likely. Another way to combat catastrophizing is to write out the worst-case scenario. Don't hold anything back. Make it absolutely tragic. Read it aloud. How realistic does it sound? Overgeneralization is when we make broad interpretations based off of a few events. For example, you experience a delayed departure on one flight due to unforeseen circumstances. Overgeneralization leads you to believe that this delay is indicative of a pattern, assuming that all future flights will also be late. You may develop a belief that punctuality is unachievable, affecting your outlook on future flights. Engaging in overgeneralization can lead to increased stress and frustration and an overall negative outlook on life. Combat the generalization by recalling similar situations in which things did work out. Embrace negative situations as challenges and opportunities to learn. Ask yourself, is it realistic to expect things to go according to plan 100% of the time? Mind reading is when we make assumptions about others' thoughts or motivations without adequate evidence. For example, you observe a passenger with a seemingly serious facial expression and immediately conclude that the passenger is dissatisfied or upset. You engage in mind reading by assuming you know what the passenger is thinking or feeling without direct communication. Engaging in mind reading can lead to negative interactions with others, a diminished sense of self, and others feeling misunderstood. To combat mind reading, examine the evidence and compare it to the information your mind has created. Personalization is when we feel responsible for events beyond our control. For example, after a long flight, you arrive at your destination. Due to a lack of gate space, your aircraft is parked at a remote stand. Stairs are used to deplane the passengers. Several passengers require wheelchair assistance and will be delayed while the proper equipment is procured. While you apologize on behalf of the company for the delay, deep down you feel like there was something you could have done to prevent this situation. Engaging in personalization can lead to feelings of guilt or shame, the belief that you will face consequences for a situation outside of your control, and additional occupational stress in future similar situations. To combat personalization, evaluate your role in the situation and consider external factors. Remember that we function as a team. Revisit the module on control to review what you can and cannot control. Filtering is when we focus on one piece of information instead of considering all of the evidence. For example, suppose your airline sends out satisfaction surveys after every flight. you get to access a report with all the results. The majority of the results were positive. However, there was one passenger complaint. You believe you are bad at your job because of one complaint. Engaging in filtering can create unnecessary self-doubt and a diminished sense of accomplishment as you ignore the positive aspects of your accomplishments. Eventually, your confidence and job satisfaction begins to erode. To combat filtering, look at the full spectrum of data available to you and ask, why am I letting one piece of information determine my value? Emotional reasoning is when we assume our emotions reflect reality. For example, after working the business class galley for the first time, you receive constructive criticism from the purser about a specific aspect of the service. Instead of objectively considering the feedback, you emotionally reason that because you feel hurt or upset, the criticism must signify a personal failure. The consequences of engaging in emotional reasoning are emotional distress, a negative sense of self, and poor decision-making. When battling emotional reasoning, consider all the evidence. Ask yourself, is this emotion appropriate for the situation? If not, what else could be bothering me? One way to combat any cognitive distortion is by knowing your ABCs. In classic cognitive behavioral therapy, we examine the A event, the B belief, and the C consequence or emotion. Finally, we examine the evidence for and against the belief. More details on this technique are provided in a worksheet, as well as a separate exercise in this module. You have finished this lesson on holding patterns or cognitive distortions. Additional exercises, worksheets, can be found at activemindcounseling.com. You are released from your holding pattern.